Inclusion.
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 Inclusion. Inclusion.
Inclusion podcast by the Centre for Inclusive Leadership.
Hello and welcome to February's Inclusion podcast with me, Chantelle Dusette, and
Me, Paul Anderson-Walsh.
hello. We are so thrilled to share this episode with you for our focus on LGBTQ plus history. We have a very special guest with us today, Amie Taylor, who is a theatre maker and author, and Trevor Read, who is an artist and a gallery owner of Adorn The Common in Covent Garden. So looking forward to having this conversation. Hope you are too, and love to hear your thoughts.
So I'm really excited, Chantelle, about having this conversation today because, you know, when we think about the whole notion of labels, I think we really want to be able to do some reclamation work here, don't we? Because labels can describe us, but they mustn't define us.
Yeah.
And I think that conversation is important. And certainly for us at the centre, and I'm thrilled to hear what Amie and Trevor will say about this, but when we think about diversity, we think about identity. And to me, you know, I think that life only really has one question on the exam paper. And that question basically is this, is who are you when you stop being who you think you should be? And so with our two precious guests, I'm kind of interested to answer that question. Who are you when you stopped being who you think you should be? So who's going to start me off? Should we go, who do you think? Should we go Amie?
Maybe, yeah.
It looks like it was a little bit of thinking time.
I might need a little bit of thinking time too, but I suppose, are you meaning in relating to labels in terms?
Yeah, I think in terms of, maybe to make it easy, because that's a very esoteric question. So let's talk about identity. So how do you self-identify? When you think about just who you are, maybe we'll build it out from there. How do you start with self-identification?
I mean, for me, that's an ever shifting kind of thing. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about recently is what labels I use and who I share those labels with as well. And that in terms of lots of things, not just sexuality, but like, you know, for me recently as well, I've been thinking more about neurodiversity because I expect that is a spectrum that I'm on and whether or not that label is something I want to share as well. But in terms of sexuality, I suppose I've gone through a lot of labels across the years. So in my mid-20s, I kind of was like, yes, lesbian, that's the one, that's what I am. And as I've got older, it's gone through more and I kind of started thinking actually maybe pansexual describes me better, which is someone who is attracted to all genders. And certainly for me now, is queer is one that I kind of come back to time and time again. And I feel a sort of a very strong connection to.
That is fascinating. See, I want to talk about that because that generationally is such a triggering statement for me. And I was saying to you before we started, one of the things I'm absolutely so excited about is the idea of how that word queer has been reclaimed. Because for me, certainly from my generation, to accuse someone of being queer, that was that came with that was very freighted. You know, that came with a lot of luggage to it.
But then I think it's in what you said is to accuse someone.
Oh, but that's the point, right? Yeah, exactly
yeah.
right. It was an accusation
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, that's a good point.
But I think it's interesting. What is it about queerness that you feel that you're really connected to now in terms of how that relates to you, Amie, the person?
I mean, and so I suppose how I experience it, and I'm very aware that this will be different for every single individual that uses that word, you know, that way to describe themselves. For me, it's not just about sexuality or, you know, or gender. It's a broader kind of sense and feeling, and it's so hard to define, and it's something I keep coming back to try to define. But it's almost, for me, it's kind of the way I live my life is with queerness, I suppose. You know, and that is in lots of ways as well. You know, I'm a 36-year-old woman who doesn't have kids. That in some ways for me makes me feel like different to some people, you know, other women my age. And
that's interesting.
I work in the arts, so I don't have a conventional kind of lifestyle in terms of, you know, I haven't, arts careers are often quite sideways moving, I find. You know, I've done lots of things from theatre making to writing books to talking about mental health in schools. You know, I've done lots of different things that have kind of across my career. So I suppose for me, it's a way of living, and I don't know if I've explained that very well, but hopefully,
beautifully. I think what's really interesting about that, I don't know what your sense about this is, Chantelle, but what's interesting to me is the notion of to be queer doesn't find itself boxed into a sexual identity. So you're saying to be queer is an expression of a way of life, which I'm taken by that. Yeah. I'm really taken by that, because then I start to think to myself, oh, well then, if I come back to my rather narrow way of having been thought about it, was queer in whose eyes? Well, how do you define queer? Do you mean queer because you don't get on the 8:13 from Barnhurst to Charing Cross and go to an office and with a bowler hat on and a Daily Telegraph under your hand and come out at 5 o'clock and then go home to a miserable life, or whatever it is? Is that what you mean? Because which is the queer in that case, right? Because you might want to have a conversation about that. So I think that's kind of a liberating idea. I like the idea of liberating it from that, because I think that's the difficulty with these labels. They're very lazy, aren't they? It's like in the whole notion of labeling people generally. You kind of use a phrase that's a lazy phrase, it's a catch-all phrase, but it misses the nuance, it misses the richness. So I'm kind of super interested.
There's a lot of freedom in being queer.
Yeah, you see, that's fascinating. Even that's fascinating, right? Say more about that.
I don't know. I suppose I wouldn't necessarily consider myself as queer now, but I would have many years ago. And the labels I would give to myself have evolved over the years quite a lot, because I've evolved and I've progressed and developed, and my needs and wants have changed. So my labels have changed with that. So I suppose now, like a queer isn't really used. Like a queer was a term that was used to insult someone, to define them as a single thing, a single person, or a single object that stood out, that wasn't normal, or wasn't part of the norm, or wasn't part of that or a community. Whereas now, queer is a term used for community. It's you are queer, you're part of the queer community. It's more of a term that is used celebratory, or to define community, rather than someone that stands on their own. I don't know, I would consider myself as a gay man, but in my 20s, if I was 20 now, would definitely probably consider myself as queer and part of the queer community, because of how I lived my life. And, I was always searching for, new music and new places to go. Whereas now I'm probably not that active in trying to find my community, because, I'm a little bit older. I have my community, I have my partner, I have my business, I have all of those things that have evolved over the years. Like, I've considered myself to be bisexual at school, because I was like, oh, I've got a girlfriend, but I also quite feel the boys in my class. So, what does that mean?
I think there's something in that about as well. Sorry, it's just coming to me. Is there something about queerness and rewriting the rules, or making up your own rules, that I really love, and something that is really important to me at the moment. So it can be like that, whether it's, you saying, oh, I'm like, of course you can be that. And at different times in your life, like, sexuality can change, like, change, or gender might shift the way you feel about it. And there's this whole lovely thing about queerness and getting to make up the rules. I think that I feel when you're queer, you're already sitting, for me, I already feel sitting slightly on the edge of things sometimes. And, something I've thought a lot about is, like, there's this whole kind of pre-prescribed thing, which is that, you grow up, you meet someone, you get married, you get a house together, you have kids, you progress through your career, you retire, and that is really kind of pushed on us from a young age. And I think for me, it's like, well, why do you have to live with your partner? What if you don't want to? What if you have like two full independent lives separate of each other? Or why do you have to define this way or that way? Or, and for me, as I get older, I kind of feel more of a sort of resistance against the labels as well. And I feel queer encompasses more for me. I hope, yeah.
Yeah, well, I agree with you entirely there. I think giving yourself the freedom to consider yourself as queer liberates the idea of actually giving yourself a particular title or a particular way of being who you are perceived to be. Like queer, you kind of make your own rules up, really, and I think that's the beauty in perhaps having that label, because it's not one thing. It's lots of different things and lots of different ways of life and lots of different ways of loving people and, you know, being attracted to people. It's not one set way.
I think that's really interesting, don't you? Because
Yeah.
did you want to come in?
Yeah, because I was just, as Amie was talking about that whole journey of cradle to grave that's been, you know, forced upon everybody, regardless of how you identify. You know, it's just kind of like, this is the grooming, the mass grooming of how it should be done. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, as you were going through this, I was starting to feel a bit anxious, and I was thinking, yeah, because, you know, if I ever got married, I would always think that Helena Bonham Carter, Tim Burton, you know, idea of we live next door and we have a door in the middle would be kind of my ideal if I had the money to do it. Do you know what I mean? Because I think I have to share the same bed with the same person for how long? Like, I just want my own space. I want to always do. I want to have my own space. I want to, like, you know, just move about and have that freedom. I thought, yeah, in a way, what's interesting about what you're saying is that for a community that has been so oppressed and gone through so much and fought through a lot, what we're talking about now is the reclaiming and how it's opened things up for you, you know, as for you. But also, I feel that permissions people who are not part of the community to also then go, well, hang on a minute, actually, that's quite interesting. How do I feel about that? And I think it just opens the whole thing up. And I think that's really good, if I can use that word. You know what I mean? I think that's progressive.
So do you know what, Chantelle? I really like this notion that you're talking about, because I tell you what this does for me, for somebody who has been grown and raised in that kind of straight-jacketed, fixed paradigm that you describe, and you describe it really quite a chilling way.
But it is chilling, isn't it?
It is chilling. Yeah, but what I find interesting about it, do you know what I find fascinating about it, is that as I was listening to the conversation, I was thinking, that's intriguing, because in the way that the paradigm that I've been raised in, I have been excluded, or have excluded myself from experiences because they sort of sit in a forbidden box. They sit outside of the paradigm that I've been raised in. So I have no real ability to assess whether they're good or bad, because they're just not in my paradigm and they're not available to me, because that's what queer people do, right? And you're getting into that conversation. So I was intrigued by that, and I was thinking what was so interesting about this conversation is actually the distinction between a queer and the queer community is the queer community is all about belonging, which I think is really interesting, and belonging on your own terms, and it's fluid and it's experimental and it's inclusive, which I think is wonderful. But the question that's nagging away in my mind is, what happens, and maybe you could share a little bit of your story, I'd love if you would, what happens when someone who is queer has to tell people from a straight fixed paradigm who think that means you're a queer, that they're not, that you're having a different experience? So kind of cutting to the chase, how do you go home to mum and dad and say, so you know this wedding you've been planning since I was 5, right?
Ain't gonna happen.
How does that conversation play out? I'm just intrigued by understanding how that plays through.
I was a very theatrical child. And I think
you left some clues around there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was a very gay line of breadcrumbs wherever I went. Could that have been stiletto shoes out of the box, or a gown off the hanger? Exactly. Makeup going missing. It was quite obvious that to my parents that I was quite effeminate as a child, loved dressing up, and I think they were always prepared to have that conversation.
Really?
Yeah, a little bit more difficult for my dad, because he grew up in a very, I suppose, macho. His dad was in the Navy, or they all had scramblers and motorbikes and boxed and all that kind of stuff. It was quite a,
interesting.
you know, very, very like typical male-driven environment.
Yeah.
And my mum's dad was a coal miner again.
Gosh, sounds like
Didn't have the
fun.
yeah, exactly. So as I was kind of growing up, I knew that I was never going to go down that avenue, and my parents had also kind of been conditioned within these different kind of domestic environments that they lived in and they grew up in. But so it was a little bit more difficult for my dad to see me growing up and kind of accept that that's who I was, whereas my mum was like, definitely got a gay in our hands, 100%. So they knew. I was too scared to tell them because obviously we'd never had any conversations around that. Wow. We didn't have any kind of queer or gay or bisexual family members. There was no one that I could kind of go, how do I do this? Or kind of go, I think I might be gay, or think I might be bisexual, or however I felt at the time. So then I actually was going out with someone, finished with them over the phone because I was so scared to kind of have that conversation with them in person. So he drove to my parents' house from Bristol to the Midlands to speak to me. And luckily I wasn't there when he turned up. So he knocked on my parents' door. My mum was like, Adrian, what are you doing here? He'd been to my house as a friend before. Right. So they knew who he was. He wasn't a stranger. And he'd waited for 2 hours and my mum was calling me and I didn't come home because I was like, I know what's going on here. Oh my God. And he sat down with my parents and said, I'm having a relationship with your son.
Thanks for that.
What?
Outed me to my parents.
Are you joking?
And I was just like, okay, so you've done that for me. I don't need to do that. Went home 2 days later, terrified. And my mum was like, we already knew. We were just waiting for you to tell us.
What a gift.
And I just thought, right, this is a cue for me. So I handed my notice in on my job. I packed a suitcase. My boss bought me a mobile phone and another suitcase to move to London. And that was the end of that. That was where my queer journey started.
Oh my God.
My honest queer journey. I was like, oh man, now I've got nothing to hide. Let's go for it.
How old were you?
18.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So hang on, and Amie, I'm going to ask you to jump in on this question as well. So there you are growing up in some sort of non-gay friendly environment.
On a farm.
On a farm.
Oh yeah.
In a rural environment,
Wow.
in a kind of blokey space, as you described. Where do you go for your identity markers? How do you figure out, oh, that's who I am? How does that work out? Because now I can watch TV, right? And I can, you know, it's accessible. I mean, you're not that old, but 20 years ago, whatever it was, then maybe that wasn't so easy to actually.
Eurotrash.
Oh yeah.
Eurotrash.
About that.
Oh, look at this! I love a bit of Eurotrash.
I looked forward to that every week because I knew there was going to be like full frontals and, you know, kinky stories and the, you know, kind of strange fetishes. And I was like,
Is that on Channel 4?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely. Channel 4, 10 o'clock Friday night. 11 o'clock Friday night.
I know, I'm
Yeah,
recording.
it was late.
It was late.
So I'd take myself off to my bedroom, lock my door, turn the volume down.
Absolutely.
And I had a Vogue subscription, I had a GQ subscription, so I'd see all of this glamour and all of this kind of glamorized queerness and gayness in these beautifully kind of glossy magazine covers, and I was just like, oh, that's what I want. And I used to bunk off school and come to London and see it all. So I'd seen it all happen. I just didn't live it. So I knew it was there, and I knew I wanted it, but it just took me a little while to kind of muster up the courage to just go for it and go, actually, do you know what? I have this opportunity now. Like, everything's out there. Everyone knows. I'm just going to pack a bag, get on a train and bugger off to London and see what happens. And I didn't have any friends either. I just moved here, stayed in a hotel for 2 weeks.
What?
Because I didn't know anybody. I didn't have, like, the people I did know.
Didn't live in the gay scene, just so we're clear.
Yeah, but also they were friends of the boy I'd just dumped. So, couldn't really call upon anybody. Yeah. But, that's another story in itself. But
we need to do another one next year.
I just kind of saw an opportunity and I thought, this is the time now. Like, this is when I should be doing this. And, you know, I've been in London 25 years now.
Did you feel liberated?
Absolutely.
I love
Terrified,
that. But liberated.
but liberated. I was like, I'm by myself. I've got nobody to answer to but me. I can just do what I want. I can go to a nightclub. I can kiss as many boys as I want. No one's going to question what I'm doing, because no one from home can see me, but also a lot of other people in London are doing this as well. So it just feels like the right thing to do. Like, it's just normal.
Wow. Did you, I'm coming to Amie, I'm so fixated.
No, me too.
Did you have a kind of tape running in your head going, this is not a good idea, this isn't how you were raised? Or did you have no background noise like that?
Whilst I was at home.
Whilst you were on the bus to London thinking, I'm going to go kiss a load of boys, did you have any?
Oh no, I was really excited. I was like, can't wait. Couldn't wait, because I knew the landscape as well, because I'd been to London by myself with
so
friends,
spied out the land.
Yeah, so I was familiar with the setup. I was familiar with Soho.
Yeah, okay.
You know, I'd get my wages, and I once a month I'd come down to London. I'd sit in Balance when Balance was still there. Yeah. All the waiters were gay, and I'd sit and have the most expensive steak and a glass of champagne. And I don't know who the fuck I think I was on those days.
But you were fabulous.
But I was having a great time. I'd spend a whole month's wages in one day in Soho, just being wonderful. And then I'd come back and I'd be like, oh, Mum, I've spent all my money. Can you lend me 50 quid? And, but I was having the time of my life, and those opportunities kind of allowed me to see that living in the Midlands in a very kind of, I suppose, macho environment, there was something else out there. Yeah, there was something else that I'd touched on that I wanted more of.
I love it. Amie, what's your story?
It's hard, isn't it? Because for me, there's so many stages to that story. I guess in the same way there are for you, because I actually, and very differently to you, I didn't have any clue I was gay or queer until I was 25. I genuinely didn't know. I probably could have done, but it was just the context in which I was living, which was, there weren't really queer people on telly or gay people on telly when I was growing up. Yeah. I didn't knowingly know any queer people until I was a bit older. The ones I did know were quite stereotypical in the way they presented. Okay. So if you wanted to kind of say, they fitted the stereotype, you could. And I kind of, especially queer women, I kind of thought, well, no, because I'm not like that. So that's not it. That's not it. And even now, when I come out to people, less so in recent years, interestingly, but when I came out 11 years ago, and when I first came out, people would be so shocked. They'd be like, really? And would sometimes say like really offensive or quite misogynistic things. I remember once just being at a restaurant with a group of people, and there was a guy there who I didn't know. And someone had told him I was gay, and he came down the table and kind of said, "Oh, congratulations on keeping your femininity," which was just, and in the moment I was kind of like, oh, and then it's as time went on, I was like, that is horrible. A horrific thing to say to someone. Like, why would you, it's just, and it's really interesting because I've been reading, trying to read Judith Butler recently, who talks about gender, and I find her work very, very hard to understand. But she does talk about, being congratulated when we perform our gender well, and being kind of punished when we don't perform our gender well.
Interesting, isn't it?
And that is something I have definitely experienced as, I wouldn't say I was heterosexual presenting, but I'm a feminine presenting woman. And people in my past certainly haven't associated that with being gay or queer. As I didn't either until I was in my mid-20s. And kind of realised that it was actually, for me, it was working on a theatre project with a lot of other queer women, all very different, that I kind of went, oh, there is no one way to be queer. It kind of made me slowly come to realise, you know, oh yes, I think that's what's going on for me here. And you know, same, I grew up in the Midlands as well, where it was very homophobic when I was growing up, you know, and it was seen as such a negative thing. I kind of really had it in my head like, well, I don't think I can be this thing, because that's not, you know, it felt like it did feel like a bad thing, you know, it really did.
Or you don't feel like you can be there, stay there in that environment.
Yeah. And I remember reclaiming dungarees, because when I was about 15.
Reclaiming.
Well, when I was about
that should be a book title.
Reclaiming dungarees. That would be the name of my autobiography.
I love that.
No, when I was about 15, I had a pair of dungarees, and my mum kind of did say, oh, lesbians wear those, you know. And I think she'd be quite horrified now to know she said that, you know. She probably doesn't remember like saying it, but she would be horrified, you know. It was just the time, it was just kind of people's attitudes to things, and you know. So yeah, I mean, I didn't know for a really long time. What's very interesting is that all of my friends that I made as a teenager, not all of them, the vast majority of the friends I made as a teenager at youth theatre, a lot of them were also gay or queer, and we all came out in our 20s, but it was like we'd sort of gravitated towards each other, not quite knowing, you know, why. And actually my very first boyfriend, who I now live with, was as friends. I live with him and his boyfriend. Not called
Adrian from.
No.
Just wanted to just clear that up.
My very first one of my very first boyfriends when I was 17, we really liked each other, and nothing ever really happened. We just loved hanging out with each other, you know. And we kind of went on a few dates, and then he rang me up on the landline, and both of us were a bit like, it's not working, is it? Don't know why. Actually, both queer. And there was that gravitation. So, but for me, it was I didn't really realise until I kind of met a lot of other queer women, and I kind of had a bit of a reference point for myself, I think. And I mean, I have given my parents all kind of headaches over the years. You know, I wanted an arts career, so that was, you know, you know, so it, you know, and they have, you know, taken it on and welcomed my partners over the years into the house and that kind of thing. And there have also been some like very difficult conversations where we've come from very different places, you know, but actually they have also learnt and grown across time, and you know, it has definitely changed. You know, they live in the Midlands in a little street, and my mum will now put up a big pride flag in the window. It is the only pride flag that has ever been in the street, and she will, you know, put a pride flag up in the window. I don't know when she does. Sometimes it's there. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's there. Maybe when I come to visit, I don't know.
But that's a big, that's big though, isn't it? That's a big gesture, isn't it? That's a really big gesture.
So you know, and that is something that's changed over the years, and it's not been easy always, you know, but and still sometimes isn't. But you know,
I do wonder about that. You know, I mean, I'm sure we've got some other things to chat about. My mind will go wandering off. But I do wonder about how much generations play into this conversation, and just thinking about that whole notion really of that sense of, so this is my form of acceptance, I've got a pride, you know, thing. It's just interesting. We wonder about the journey that the whole family has to go on in that sense, don't you? And I just think it's fascinating.
And I think what's interesting about being queer is that I guess if you're saying, you know, you're not born to queer parents necessarily, so you have to find your community. You have to find your family.
That's
you don't
right.
have that shared culture. Like you are born with a culture that you do not share with your birth parents. So you have to really find a sort of an alternative. I don't know if I have an alternative family that are my queer family, like, you know, because we have the shared history and the shared understanding that doesn't necessarily come from a birth family, or, you know, so.
Wow. That's a big point, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That's a.
So you come into this world with a culture that you don't share with the people that brought you into this world. Like, that's interesting, you know. And then you have to go and find essentially your queer family to feel that connection and just you know the unspoken. You know, it's just that comfort, that connection, that understanding that you don't have to explain. You know, it's just all kind of there.
Sorry.
No.
You also need these people in your life to go to and go, what do I do in this situation? Because you can't really go to your own parents and ask them because they've not lived that life. You know, so you need those kind of you know, your queer family to go, what do I do with this? Like, how do I do that?
No, I completely get that. And that kind of pushes me to another question, because obviously we're celebrating LGBTQ plus month, and one of the things I'm really interested in understanding is there'll be a lot of people that'll be watching this who are not from the queer community, but want to be allies, want to be accomplices, want to be supporters. And I think about the amount of people that might be like, you know, your parents' age that might be working this out. So how can we be better allies? What would be helpful?
Shall I go?
Yeah.
I mean, I just think with allyship, the first thing you just need to do is just listen. Like, just really sit back and listen, and listen to the voices, and really understand that although a community gets lumped together, everyone in that community's experience is very different. So I think always, like, you know, reading books that are just written by people from that community, whether or not it's directly about their experience or it's about something else, you know, just hearing those voices, I think, is so important. Because, and just not making assumptions of how it is, or, you know, I've definitely in the past, I remember once someone for a very long time telling me, I don't think they were queer, I think they were trying to be a good ally, but they spent a long time telling me about how awful it is for gay people. And I really didn't want to, I was out for the night and I was kind of like, I don't really want to know about all the homophobia that exists in the world right now. And they were, I really appreciate they were trying to be a really good ally by being kind of like, I see everything that's going on for you and it's awful. But it really was like hard to hear. And actually I wish in a way they had have said, oh, do you mind talking about this? Like, well, what do you find hard? Or, you know, rather than telling me everything that's really hard, it felt, it's hard to explain it, but it's that thing of just listening really deeply. And I think whoever you're allying with is to really kind of listen deeply, and then really stand in a space with those people, you know, like really stand in a space, but not take up space, but really stand in the space.
That's a nice phrase.
And be sort of present in it. I think, I don't know if you want to.
I mean, I couldn't have said it better, to be honest. But I'd also kind of like to add that people need to be more vocal when they're protecting and standing up for, you know, for their children or partners or family that, you know, are part of the queer, you know, LGBTQ plus community. You know, they need to have the courage to you know, if someone's saying something derogatory or even just using silly words like puff or queer or whatever, just kind of say, it's not the right word, pal.
You need to be an upstander, right?
Yeah, I just think you need to pull people aside or, you know, pull people up on these things. And, you know, even if it's just kind of saying, it's not the right word, this is the right word, or that's the right term, or why do you think that? Question it, question people, make other people realise that, you know, what they're saying and what they're promoting, I suppose, is not acceptable, or it's not.
Yeah, I think, sorry, can I add two things there? Sorry, I had to interrupt. I think just to add 2 points, that one is like also when no one's listening, like, you know, you might be with one other person, neither of you might be queer, for, you know, in this example, but still if they say something, not letting it slide, because being like, oh, well, it doesn't matter because, you know, I'm not gay and they're not gay, but actually still, you know, and that goes for any kind of prejudice you hear, you know,
call
regardless.
It in. You got to call it in, don't you? You got to call it in.
Yeah. And then the other thing I was going to say, is being prepared for that, because it might happen. And I remember being on a train a few years ago and there was a woman down the carriage, she was, you know, just really spouting to her friend, like some really awful sort of homophobic, transphobic stuff. And it was really upsetting to hear. And so I stood up and I went down the carriage and I said, you know, I'm on my way to work and it's really upsetting me because I can hear what you're saying and I'm gay. And she really turned on me and was kind of like, you're disgusting. I don't want to see 2 women kissing in public. You're disgusting. Really sort of awful, you know. And
this is on your way to work. So in the morning.
kind of like 60-something-year-old woman sitting
On
in
on a packed train.
It wasn't like it was the overground
Right.
on the way to Harrow, and it was there were kind of people sitting down, and there were kids sitting down, and and
Really?
What?
really
And
sort of,
also, who has those kind of thoughts at 9 o'clock in the morning?
I mean, it's
Straight
just
away.
like,
Do you know what I mean? Like, you wake up and think, I'm going to be a bitch today.
why is this the conversation you're choosing to
This is
have?
just
Your
so
one
bizarre.
life, and you want to sit here, But what really shocked me was no one stood up and said it. And I actually, while I was talking to her, I burst into tears because it was so upsetting. And I was saying, and she was like, I don't want to see two women kissing. It's disgusting. And I said, but you wouldn't say that about straight people, And she was just like, no, I wouldn't. And just being really awful. But no one stood up and said anything. And it was really shocking to me that there was a whole carriage of people and no one stood up. And I would like to think people felt unprepared. And so I always think, rehearse that situation in your head. Like, what would you do? And whether it's, you're hearing homophobia or transphobia or racism or, something else, like being ready to really think, how would I step in that situation and challenge it, and then because I had to walk through the train carriage in tears at the end because she got off the train and I went back through and I just had to walk through all of these people who had just heard everything happen and not one person had said a thing. So I walked down and sat on my own at the other end of the train and then one man came up to me later and he was like, oh, sometimes you just have to ignore people. And it's like, no. Like,
Oh my God.
No, because if you ignor it, it's going to
Yeah.
happen again. And she's going to think that
yeah.
it's okay to do that, and it's not.
And I do really hope, like I have this, and actually interestingly, her friend who she was talking to tried to give me a hug. She stood up and she went, oh, I'm so sorry about this. And I was kind of like, please don't touch me. Like, I was obviously in real fight or flight mode. But I wonder what happened after they got off the train, and I wonder what happened for her. And I wonder if she would, although it was horrible in the moment, I'm like, actually though, by saying something, maybe that's the last time she decided to have that conversation in public. Can't control her thoughts, but hopefully can have some kind of impact on, and her friend obviously didn't agree with her because she was really trying to comfort me. So it's like, I wonder what conversation they had after.
That's fascinating.
But then also her friends not saying that's enough.
Yeah.
It's supporting that narrative.
But you see, this is half of why this is a complex conversation is because you're absolutely right. The right thing to do in the moment is someone needs to stand up, call it in, and stand with you. Absolutely. One of the tricky things that we observe around this type of conversation at a more micro level, that was a hideous macro example, but a more micro level, is that if I then stand with you, my danger is that I might put my own belonging status in jeopardy. And people are very careful about that because they want to go, well, I kind of want to belong to this group. And if I stand with this group, that's going to potentially leave me excluded. And that is all really, really tricky stuff. But I agree, you have to be right that ultimately the notion of deeply listening to each other and listening with a view to understanding, but then understanding that we have a responsibility as humans to say, sorry, that really isn't okay. No, that's not okay.
But also just knowing that, as you said, it's just find that courage to just say, like, I don't agree, and just to stand by, even if you just stand next to that person and just say, I don't agree. It might encourage someone else to do, I don't agree, rather than being, you can be combative, you can whatever, but like if that feels too much to kind of go toe for toe, then I think just standing up and standing by that person and just saying, I don't agree.
Really?
Also, I
and
can
looking in
guarantee
the eye, like,
anyone
no.
in that situation, as soon as you stand up and go, actually, I'm gonna support this.
Yeah.
As scary as it might be, you'll feel better for it after.
100%.
You'll feel like you've
Absolutely.
accomplished
Because it's true.
something after.
Because it's truth.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of that. I'm conscious of the time, but I'm also conscious of that lovely phrase that says, evil men prosper when good men stay silent. There is a point where you actually have to stand up and go, no, we're gonna do the right thing.
I just think it's so important to have the conversation about being, upstanders. I think it's really, really important to do that. And to hopefully people listening, they can help them give some way into being able to do that as well, I think is really key. But I want to ask you two more questions. So thinking about your kind of origin stories and like where you are now. So Amie, I know that, you've been in theatre for a long time. You talked about being in youth theatre, but, you've been in deviser theatre maker. You do puppeteering, don't you, as well?
Yeah, not so much nowadays, but I
Yeah.
do puppeteering, shadow puppetry
Yeah.
as well, yeah.
And you're an author of 2 children's books.
Yes, third one coming next year.
Oh, wow. What's it called? What's it called?
The next year, Pride Families. It's about all the different ways queer people have families.
Oh, I love that.
With kids or without kids, you know.
It's so lovely.
Got to ask you though, just sorry, we've been not doing my job properly. Where can we get it?
So it's been published late 2023 from Jessica Kingsley Publishers. It's normally available sort of everywhere you'd buy books from, so Waterstones, WH Smiths. Don't buy it on Amazon, it will be there, but try and get it from somewhere else.
As an author who gets 8p for every book that's sold on Amazon, I completely understand the problem with that. Good stuff. Oh, exciting.
And your books are aimed at children, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's lovely. There's the LGBTQ focus on children, because going back to what you said at the beginning, you had no reference points when you were growing up. So now you're able to write these wonderful books that are celebratory, that can give children access, a way to identify and connect with through these stories, right?
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely right. Do you want me to?
Yeah, please, yeah.
So actually I've written 2 books. One is about sort of mental health for kids and one's about LGBTQ stuff for kids. And I guess both books were the books I wish had been on my bookshelf when I was a kid.
That's so good.
It's that thing, isn't it? I was talking to someone recently saying there's so much in the world that we can't fix and we have no power over, but it's about looking for those little places where I guess you can make that sort of change in the world. The big book of LGBTQ activities is a real mouthful, but it's 5 different stories for kids. Each one introduces a different LGBTQ identity, but the books are really for teachers to use in school, because inclusive RSE came in last year. That's inclusive relationship and sex education, which means it now has to be taught in the curriculum. And I think, there might be some teachers who feel really daunted by that if they're not queer themselves, they don't belong to the community. So the idea is they can literally pick up the book, photocopies and worksheets, it's all there. You can do LGBTQ snap, colour in a queer wedding picture. There's all sorts, practice using non-binary pronouns for characters. So practice using they, them for a character in the book. So to sort of get kids used to that. So it's all different stuff.
Brilliant.
So yeah.
Great resource. We should make that available, make people know about that.
Absolutely. Oh, that'll be up. We'll put that up for
Yeah,
sure.
that's good.
That's incredible.
Wonderful.
And Trevor, your journey to becoming an artist. I love that story of how you became an artist during lockdown.
It was a very happy accident. It was never intended. So I guess I had a lot of time on my hands. And I already had a brand called Adorn The Common that was just a hobby, really. I was just embroidering T-shirts, slogans on T-shirts, because I was sick of seeing people wearing the same T-shirts. So quite a lot of it was, quite homoerotically charged and a bit offensive, with I'm here for that. I did some silk screen printing of a series called You Are Golden, that I intended to give to people, to say you are golden, you are precious, you are valuable, because at the time people just needed to be cheered up. Yeah. So that was me kind of falling back in love with my love for art, and then realised that I got a lot of friends that were finding it hard to get representation. So after a few months, I managed to find myself a physical location. Started with 12 artists, and now I have 43 within a year. And we have a brand new central London location in Seven Dials in Monmouth Street. So everything's happened so quickly, but I've just gone with it. We're a very inclusive gallery. I work with a family of Black artists, queer artists, elderly artists. I have a 90-year-old and 87-year-old on my books, autistic artists. So it's a very inclusive, creative community space. And that's what really makes me tick now. Yeah. I wanted to use the space to represent underrepresented creatives, whether that's textile designers, ceramic artists, painters, illustrators, photographers. First and foremost, it's kind of beautiful art, but everything has a story. Yeah. Everything has to have a story, because if not, I'm redundant, and when people come in, I want to be able to share tales and, share little hooks so that when they come in, they have something more to be able to appreciate about the work that's there. So it's happened very quickly, but you know, I've welcomed it with open arms, and it's turned into something bigger and better than I had imagined. Really, it was never my intention to have what we have now, but it's, you know, it's there and it's expanding, and sooner or later we're going to outgrow the space where we are now. You will.
And I think just as someone who's shared that space with you, and it just feels like anyone that comes in there, it's I really hope this doesn't sound corny, but it feels like it's just your heart. Like, that's why it's expanding, because it's like it's emitting from you. Like, it's just keeps going. It's got a community. It's got everything. It's just such a wonderful place that you've created. I just love it.
I was going to say something like similar to that, because I've been in the space with you, of course, and I think it's Trevor's generosity that's so interesting to me, about how generous you are with the space, and it's wonderful.
It is.
It's wonderful.
So my question then is, if you could give your younger selves advice, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourselves?
One bit of advice. That's a good question.
I would probably choose my friends a little wisely, wiser.
Nice.
I think because I didn't have a crew or a tribe or a community, like when I first moved to London, I suppose, I didn't know anyone. I kind of just latched on to whoever showed me a little bit of interest, because I was that desperate to find friends and find community or find people that were like me. So I just kind of was attracted to everybody. I mean, everybody looked wonderful, from someone from the, you know, a little town in the Midlands. I wish I had have just took my time to make more valuable friends, I suppose. I met a lot of people that were not the best for me, that and I went kind of skipping after them down some wrong paths. So I wish I'd have chosen my friends kind of more wiser, because I think had I have had more friends that were looking out for me, I probably would have done what I do now a lot sooner.
But that may be your journey, right? Maybe that's the point of the journey. But that's really good advice. I think choosing your friends more wisely is a really, really, really smart idea. That's a good idea. So, Amie.
My one. It's such a difficult question. But I think something for me, as well as queerness, I was always very arty and a bit eccentric and a bit weird and very excitable, and I've always felt my feelings in really big ways, and emotions sometimes just pour out of me and I can't really control them. And actually, my advice to my younger self would be just be you, and if people don't like it, that really is their problem. There's a brilliant woman on Instagram who I follow called Elise Myers, and she has a saying which is "go find less," which means if she's too much for you, then you know you can go and find less. And I love that, because it's just, for me, it's like, I think I've often throughout life worried about being too much or taking up too much space, and actually, like, obviously not taking up all the space, but I think it's okay to take up, you know, space and to just be however you are. And I think that would definitely be my advice to my younger self.
Just love it.
I love that.
Go
find less.
Go find less.
I love that. That is great.
It's nice, isn't it? Go find less is good.
And I think my last question, I really wanted to ask you this because LGBTQ plus History Month. So who would be your favourite figure from history that you connected with, and why? Who is that figure?
Oscar Wilde.
Oh, great! You gave a Thesps answer. Fantastic.
If I could be in any era, I would definitely be a queer dandy. 100%.
I love that.
Absolutely. I love the story of the Green Carnation, where he'd requested everyone to wear a green carnation to make yourself known. I love everything about it. Yeah. And I love the romanticism about it. I love the dress. I love that, you know, he wasn't afraid to in the end, to kind of be open about who he was and got arrested and protested. And yes, I think definitely Oscar Wilde.
That's great.
I probably wouldn't want to be him, but he's my kind of favourite character, I suppose, from all of the kind of LGBTQ references that
I love that.
I know.
Oscar Wilde. Who was yours, Amie?
Well, I did think about this a lot. It's the kind of question you ask me, and my whole brain goes blank and I forget everything I've ever learned. But I was thinking about, I suppose, just all of the people, you know, who were unapologetically queer and themselves, you know, and all of the people who weren't as well, and it wasn't safe to be, you know, but maybe made change in smaller ways that didn't get documented or marked. But the person I chose was Marsha P. Johnson, who was a trans woman who played a really big part in the Stonewall riots. And it's really, you know, those people that we owe a lot to today. And I think we can, you know, who fought for us to have, you know, the freedoms that we have. And there's a very deep gratitude. And that is the culture I think you sort of inherit a little bit when you're queer. It's like, actually, that is also, you know, not my direct history, but those are the people that have shaped the world so that I can live how I do today. And we're not there yet. There's still, you know, a very, very long way to go. But I think, yes, definitely a very deep gratitude.
And at the cost of their own health and lives.
Yeah.
So good.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful time just talking to both of you.
So exciting. I love doing this kind of stuff.
Do you know what? It's funny. I don't know if I can say this, but it's been on my mind for a little while. So let me just say it, and maybe we'll lose it, but I'll say it anyway. I've said to you, I think, Amie, I'm really interested in doing some reading around queer theology. It's something I'm very interested in reading about. And as I've been sitting here, I've been thinking of this phrase that's in the ancient text, and it says, "But you are a peculiar people, a chosen generation, a royal priesthood." And I've been sitting here thinking to myself, that's what reclaiming queer is about. It's about saying that notion about we are a peculiar people. What does that mean? It means not conventional, not forced into a paradigm, but that's the chosenness. That's the thing that we need to celebrate. So I kind of go from this super excited. So I just feel honoured that you've shared your stories with us. So thank you. Thank you so much.
An honour to be chosen to share it with you.
Wonderful. A royal priesthood, seeing all those wonderful colours.
I don't mind being considered peculiar.
That's what I'm saying.
It just means you know, there's not many.
But I feel peculiar. That's why I like the word. That's why I think it's an interesting word to talk about, because I'm absolutely peculiar. I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Yeah, I think I'd rather people look at me and go, what's this then? Than go,
oh, I know what that is.
I think peculiar is intriguing. You know? And I have to say, I own weird. Like, I happily own weird. I'm weird.
I like that.
Yeah. We're all weird. We're all really weird. Some of us just like let it out more, but
I love that.
we are.
I've actually got some prints in the shop, and they're all about that. Like, one is we're all someone else's weirdo, and one says, "Oh, I like it when you're weird," or "You're weird and I like it." You know, there's a lot of kind of references there in the gallery that are very. You know what kind of space it is when you walk through the door, and if you don't like it, you can fuck off.
There we'll end the podcast. Been great.
Thank you. Really great spending this time talking to you. Thank you so much.
Brilliant guest. Well, that was interesting.
Well, that was fantastic.
That was wonderful. I just love that.
Really, really great conversation with Amie Taylor and Trevor Read. My goodness, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. That was really, really great. Thank you so much for tuning in, and leave your comments and see you on the next one. Thank you so much. Take care for now.